The 10 best Mel Gibson movies of all time. Before we get started, be sure to give that like button a little love and hit subscribe to stay in the loop for future exciting content. 1. Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. The third and final Mad Max movie to star Mel Gibson is undoubtedly the weakest, but for fans of the franchise, 1985's Beyond Thunderdome remains a must-see. The success of the first two films meant that writer-director George Miller had a Hollywood-sized budget to play with this time around, and it showed. The sets are more elaborate. Max discovers Bartertown, the wasteland's biggest outpost and home of a gladiatorial arena called the Thunderdome. And there's some genuine star power backing Gibson up, as Tina Turner plays Bartertown's ruthless leader. She exiles Max, only for him to be saved by a tribe of desert children, descendants of plane crash survivors who've been living in a secluded oasis. 2. Signs. M. Night Shyamalan drew comparisons to both Steven Spielberg and Alfred Hitchcock when he burst onto the Hollywood scene with his hugely successful supernatural thriller, The Sixth Sense, in 1999. And the influence of both those directors is strong in 2002 Signs. Mel Gibson stars in one of his more reserved roles, playing a farmer and former Episcopal priest. Father of two, Graham Hess lost his faith in God after his wife was brutally killed in a freak car accident 6 months prior to the events of the film. He's forced to put his grieving to one side when strange crop circles appear on his land and on farms all around the world, which all turn out to be a means of navigation for a hostile extraterrestrial race. What unfolds is an intimate alien invasion movie that Gibson anchors with quiet aplomb. 3. The Patriot. The rousing score that John Williams composed for The Patriot was nominated for an Oscar, but Roland Emmerich's Revolutionary War epic was never going to win any awards for historical accuracy. The Los Angeles Times was quick to point out the film's not inconsiderable failures in this department. Producers, meanwhile, were keen to highlight the fact that advisors from the Smithsonian Institution found Mel Gibson's character, a South Carolina planter who employs free former slaves, to be completely credible, per the New York Times. Either way, if you go into this one expecting a factual account of what went down during the American War of Independence, you're going to come away disappointed. If your goal is to see a vengeful Mel Gibson kick some stuffy British butt, however, then The Patriot is for you. 4. The Bounty. In 1789, a master's mate by the name of Fletcher Christian led a mutiny on the Royal Navy merchant vessel, the HMS Bounty, kickstarting a series of events that would be recreated on the big screen on more than one occasion. Mel Gibson took on the role of Christian in 1984's The Bounty, one previously played by both Clark Gable and Marlon Brando. The part of overthrown Captain William Bligh, who spent 7 weeks at sea after being cast adrift in a small boat with 18 men, completing a remarkable 4,000-mile journey to Timor, was played by Anthony Hopkins, who turned in one of the most interesting performances of 1984, according to veteran film critic Roger Ebert. 5. We Were Soldiers. Released in 2002, Mel Gibson's Vietnam War movie, We Were Soldiers came out on the back of Saving Private Ryan and Black Hawk Down, and while it didn't do quite as well with the critics as those two films, the leading man won a lot of personal plaudits. Producer and longtime film critic Debbie Lynn Elias, writing on her website Behind the Lens, said, Mel Gibson's portrayal of Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore is indisputably the finest of his career, perfecting a blend of a quietly authoritative razor-sharp soldier with unquestioning allegiance to God, his country, and his men, with a moral compass reflecting devotion and light-hearted tenderness to his family. To call it Gibson's best ever work is perhaps a stretch, but it's hard not to be moved by his performance. 6. Get the Gringo. Mel Gibson's reputation was being dragged through the mud again when Get the Gringo was released in 2012, but most critics opted to review the film based on its merits alone, and the vast majority of them found it to be pretty darn entertaining. Gibson plays a career criminal who gets busted in Mexico and sent to an open prison, where gangsters run the show and the families of inmates are allowed to come and go as they please. He strikes up a relationship with a kid, Kevin Hernandez, who regularly visits his incarcerated mother, and when he learns that the prison's head honcho plans on harvesting the youngster's liver, he's in desperate need of a transplant, and the kid matches his rare blood type. The American decides to lend a hand. 7. Bloodfather. If you enjoyed seeing a mid-50s Mel Gibson going up against an army of gangsters in Get the Gringo, you're probably going to get a real kick out of 2016's Bloodfather, a violent crime thriller that's very much in the same vein. Released the year that Gibson turned 60, the former heartthrob sports a bedraggled gray beard and some very real wrinkles as he tries to keep his daughter, Erin Moriarty, with a terrific supporting turn alongside an unexpectedly engaging Gibson, said The Guardian, saved from her drug-peddling former boyfriend and his murderous gang. It turns out her ex is a member of a Mexican cartel, and knowing she's seen way too much, he won't let her go easy. 8. Leal Weapon 2. Richard Donner's Leal Weapon became a critical and commercial success upon its release in 1987, and naturally, a sequel soon followed. Donner returned to the director's chair for 1989's Leal Weapon 2, while co-stars Mel Gibson and Danny Glover stepped back into the roles of Martin Riggs and Roger Murtaugh, the polar opposite LAPD partners that audiences grew to love in the first film. Their second outing together didn't quite reach the same heights, but Leal Weapon 2, which introduces Joe Pesci's federal witness Leo Getz to the franchise, remains one of the most memorable action movies of the 1980s. 9. Mad Max. The film that started it all for Mel Gibson, 1979's Mad Max, remains one of cinema's greatest success stories, a real labor of love for the then inexperienced filmmaker George Miller. The toughest film I ever made was the first Mad Max, Miller once told IndieWire. I didn't know much about filmmaking, and it was rather bewildering. The Aussie visionary had a budget of less than $400,000 to play with, yet his dystopian thriller made over $100 million at the global box office and held the record for the most profitable movie ever made until the release of the handheld horror, The Blair Witch Project, over 2 decades later, per Vanity Fair. 10. Braveheart. The Scots were less than enthusiastic about actor-director Mel Gibson's imitation of their accent in 1995's Braveheart, but American audiences were willing to forgive him the odd slip. His turn as 13th century Scottish freedom fighter William Wallace would become one of the actor's most beloved performances, and despite containing several historical inaccuracies, his film is a part of Scotland's cultural identity, according to The Scotsman. Surprisingly, Gibson was passed over in the acting department when it came time for the Oscar nominations, but he was named Best Director for Braveheart, which also took home the award for Best Picture. Please show your support and appreciation by hitting Super Thanks. Proceeds will go to fund future videos.